So we're started, or are we? Yeah, we're live.
All right. So hello and welcome. I'm here to welcome you to both the YouTube channel of the Carnegie Russia Eurasia Center and also the X account of Carnegie Politica. And we're here for a discussion with two fantastic Carnegie analysts and experts on, everything that will happen next after Russia re-elected Putin, if we can call it an election. So the question that we're going to be addressing is just what next, But it has been a hectic few weeks in the Russian news cycle. We've been covering one major story after another. So just to give you a quick run through as we kick off, we saw last month the death of Alexei Navalny, Russia's top opposition leader, in prison, which transformed the political landscape and, removed one of the most powerful challengers to Vladimir Putin's rule, perhaps the only figure who is able to truly sort of mobilize mass street protests in the country, even from his jail cell. Then came his funeral, which we had this massive outpouring of public grief, thousands of people, an unexpected amount of people going to his grave on the day of his funeral and drowning the whole thing in flowers. And then this weekend we had the shocking scenes from the concert hall just outside of Moscow, where 4 gunmen stormed the venue and killed some 138 people, making it one of the deadliest terror attacks on Russian soil in decades, maybe even in its entire history. So that's something that has also shaken the country to the core. Now, somewhere in the middle of all of this was another tiny event, which was Vladimir Putin's re-election, the sort of watershed moment, I guess, for bringing him into another term. And what we will be talking about is what that will look like, what that next term will look like. We now have, if Putin stays in office throughout the whole term, he will be in power until 2030. And what does this mean for Russia's future? What's next? With me to discuss this today are 2 brilliant Carnegie experts. We have this constant problem at the Financial Times. We call it the Carnegie problem. We want to quote our very insightful guests today all the time and have to constantly remind ourselves to diversify. But the Carnegie problem. So we're delighted to have them here today talking about Russia's future. So Alexandra Baunov and Alexandra Prokopenko, and I am Polina Ivanova, the Moscow correspondent for the Financial Times. So before we get started, after that sort of sweeping introduction as to what's been happening in Russian politics and the reason why I am exhausted, I would like to encourage you to subscribe to the YouTube channel of the Carnegie Russia Eurasia Center, so that you can be in the loop for future events like this, and also to follow the accounts of Carnegie Politica on X, and on Telegram if you use it. It gives you kind of regular access to all of the analysis on Russia and Eurasia by our fantastic experts. And the links are in the event description. So there we go. So hit like. And hit like on this YouTube live stream as well, because that will bring it to the fore so more people can join us today. Thank you. So let's get started. I think the first major event after Putin, went through this re-election procedure, we can talk about what we want to call it. The first big event is the Crocus City Hall attack. So a huge shock for the country, the first attack of this scale in really a very, very long time, and something that will set the tone, no doubt, for the rest of the next, 6 years, the rest of the term. So Alexander, maybe I would start with you. How does this shake Putin's image? What impact does this event have on Putin's image as the strongman leader? And suddenly there's this security event poking holes in that narrative.
I wouldn't say that it has some major impact on Putin's leader, because in every country, security forces from time to time missing a hit from terrorists. This happens quite a while during Putin's regime in Russian history. So I think that for here, I don't expect something happens, and I don't expect any major reshuffling among Siloviks because of these tragic events at the Krakow City Hall. But what I think that the influence of the security services, especially of FSB, will increase. And what we heard today from head of FSB, Alexander Bortnikov, that he said that that FSB works more or less fine and more or less effective. That things, unfortunate events usually happens, but not usually happens. That happens, but it's not in. It's not what we need to get used to, and he said that the work of FSB is now more intense and more threats. They see Ukraine extremists and now again ISIS, which means that it requires more money on personnel. That's what they definitely will get, and I think that, well, bad news for Finance Minister Anton Siluanov that they need to open pockets to bring more money to security forces. They will require more personnel. They probably will require from the economy, from the society, to level up the awareness of any kind of anti-terroristic threats. So, but I don't think that it will hit significantly image of Putin. He survived through all previous terroristic attacks, and this one, well, it shows that it proves one more time that in totalitarian regime, the totalitarian regime are not dealing better with this kind of threats rather than democratic ones. That's the first outcome from that, and the second, which I also see important, is how Putin tries to bring Ukraine to this issue, and seems that all my interlocutors in Russia and all people I spoke with, no one believes that there is a huge Ukrainian soul or huge Ukrainian involvement. That it's somewhere from the other side. So yeah, I think I will stop here, and probably Alexander has something to add.
Yeah, Alexander, I wonder whether you agree with that. For me, I see Putin's rise to power linked very closely to his ability to project a certain stability and security for the country in the face of attacks by Chechen terrorists. At the time, we had the first and the second Chechen war, and that's kind of the backdrop to Putin's coming to power. Do you agree that that this has no impact on his image, his ability to provide that kind of stability and that kind of pact with society that he has?
In fact, for many years, Putin projected this idea of this image of the guardian of stability in Russia, and the stability was the main slogan of his regime. But we have to remember that he started as president not in a very stable time. So started as a crisis manager who started the war, initiated the Second Chechen War, whose result was not that clear. Now, retrospectively, when Russia won in Chechnya, we may say that he used this war to increase his popularity and seize power. But at that time, it was the outcome was not clear. Only 3 years before, Russia has lost in the same province. So he started as a crisis manager, and he paradoxically returned to this role, we can say, at the end or the ending phase of his regime. And the paradox of the situation is that he dismantled the stability he built with his own hands. He was building stability for years, and with the invasion in Ukraine, he hasn't left a single brick of this stability. Still, the ordinary citizens, the population, are accepting him as somebody, as a politician, as a leader who can bring them out of this situation. He can save them from these new conditions. It's the very, I don't know, trickster, ambiguous role.
Yeah.
He is both ways. From one side, he is he used to be for many years a main guardian of the stability. Now, when he destroyed this stability with his own hands, he is seen by the vast majority of the population as somebody who will save them from the crisis, handmade crisis, by the way, and he returned to this role of the crisis manager. And people somehow trust him as a crisis manager because this was his initial role 20 and more years ago.
So even something, yeah. So even something as devastating as this attack, something as shocking as this attack, his system is still able to absorb that using these kind of narratives as we go forward into his next term. That's not going to be something that defines his rule. What I did think was very noticeable. Well, was very notable were these images of the attackers, the gunmen, following kind of the signs of showing the signs of torture. They were brought into a courtroom. One had been mutilated. One had been beaten up. Is that the image of the next term? Is this kind of violence been normalized now in Russian society? Is that perhaps a defining image of the next years? Is that where we're headed, this kind of normalization of violence? And how militarized is Russian society right now? Maybe I would ask you, Alexandra.
I wouldn't be hurry up with the conclusions that these particular images would be the image of the next Putin 6-year term. And I need to remind very unpleasant facts that before, prisoners in Guantanamo and other, so there were pretty a lot of events happens with the bad stuff happens with terrorists, and they were tortured even in democratic countries. So I was, and here I think I will probably stay here with this kind of stuff. But what actually is noticeable that the tolerance to violence increased significantly during last 2 years because of the war, because of so Russian society was. I couldn't say that it was super aggressive, but it was quite aggressive and tolerated to violence because of the history, because of the memory of 2 Chechen wars, because of the memory of counter-terroristic operation, which actually was on the territory of Russia during, I think, during zeros, during late zeros, during tens. And there were lots of people who know how to use guns, how to use weapons, and it was a major problem for Rosguardia and both for FSB that the society has guns on their hands and they try to prevent the spreading. And now, starting this war, Putin basically made a huge push to raise the tolerance of the violence among the society, and because and people someone lost someone in Ukraine, so people are
becoming accustomed to it.
So I don't expect something good in here, and I don't think that this tolerance somehow will decrease. And that's probably that's why that's also a part of explanation why the topic of coming back to the death penalty raised in Russia again.
Yeah. Do you think that's a particularly serious conversation?
I think that
death penalty.
It's only 2 days after. Well, basically, not 4, but only 2 days. 2 working days after the tragedy. So now it looks to me like as a communication tool, zoom in or zoom out. So from time to time, within Russian elites and within Russian lawmakers, there is a debate on. So do we need to come back to the death penalty? So they're zooming in. They are checking the tolerance of the society to this issue, and then they're zooming out. So for after 2 working days, I couldn't say that they are ready to bring it back immediately. So that's why probably lawmakers are introducing, so okay, we will set up the commission who will learn the legislation, who will learn the practices, and then we will come to the decision, not to bringing it back, or then we'll come to the decision about the death penalty and a whole. So we're quite far from the final decision, but it's also, I think that it's also a tool to channelize people's demand on action.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think it's better to call somebody else, us, maybe me, Sasha, just not to confuse.
Well, who wants to be Sasha?
I can be Sasha.
Okay.
Both of us can be, but just choose who is.
I will be Sasha, you will be Alexander.
Okay, Sasha and Alexander. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, Alexander, I'll come to you with this one then. I think we've looked at the Crocus City Hall attack and what that could mean for the next few years of Putin's rule, and this huge event that will be, a marker in Russian history and his rule. Let's go back to the election itself. So we're talking about what will happen in the next few years. First of all, what sort of words were you using to describe it? I was a bit stuck when I was writing, thinking, am I going to call it electoral theater? Is it a quasi-electoral voting procedure? What terms were you using? And I ask this more sort of frivolous question in order to get to the point of, how fair and fraudulent was this vote? How did this vote for you compare to previous quasi-electoral voting procedures in the past that brought Putin back to power again?
Well, to me, it's not very inspiring topic. It's another reaffirmation of the leader. It's the only maybe two interesting point is that there are first elections under the new amended constitution, and with the new electoral technologies that include 3 days voting, which increase the possibility of increase technically with administrative tools the turnout, which is very important for any authoritarian head of state. Then with the electronic vote, which is totally intransparent, I would say, especially in regions, which can again be used to change numbers. And it's a very strange vote with the highest result in all Putin's time. So in all Putin's result and 87 and something, which is
what did that say to you? Yeah.
And how we commend this result, basically, exactly as we commend the tortures. Russian leadership, those who are building the new Russian state, are living against the West. Russia should live against the West. The result of 87 is a mark of final rupture with Western standards of results, Western niceties of voting results, of voting procedures, exactly the same way as not the fact of tortures, because we had tortures before the Russian detention units of the police, of the law and order forces, but to show to show these tortures to the public, it's something new, and it's exactly motivated by the same wish, same idea to live against the West. The West prohibits tortures. We are showing that we are not this weakened, effeminated, West, which is afraid of inflicting pain to its enemies. We are proud of how we are able to make to afflict pain, to inflict pain to our enemies. Same with the result. We are not anymore this weakened, degraded West, which is afraid of high support of a strong leader and is thinking about is thinking that the result of 47% is a huge victory if you are talking about parliamentary democracy, or 50 and something if you are consider the presidential systems. And now we are showing that in our sovereign democracy, in our sovereign Russian, I don't know, Federation, Republic, Empire, whatever, we have a strong leader with the support that has nothing to do with Western standards anymore. This is the message.
Yeah. Do you think, Sasha, do you think the Russian public, even cared about these elections? Does any of this matter?
I think yes, and this in terms of bureaucratic machine, in terms of all this bureaucratic facility, these elections was important for those who facilitate them, because it's from the result depended their bonuses, their expectations of their future career, and other stuff. And it's actually a big group of people involved in that. So for them, it's important, and for Russian society, we're in a very paradoxical situation now. So we saw people. We saw both people. Some of people were forced to go to the voting stations. Some came voluntarily. But it's a matter of fact that I also think that economy brought people to the voting stations. So people are, well, honestly, people in Russia now live better in their perception as they lived ever before, and this we see from recent numbers. So, for instance, according to Levada, the proportion of Russians who feel that the distribution of material wealth in Russia is getting more unfair actually fell from 45% to 25% in November 2023. We see how payments we see how the war ballooning wages in both military and civil sector, and people at this particular moment, I don't think that they have a real reasoning and reflection on coming future, but living today. And at this particular moment, they see this amount of money they spend, and we're in a very odd situation for the economy when people same time spending and saving. And and also this sense of confidence, which which was admitted actually by Elvira Nabiulina on her recent press conference back to last Friday. This level of confidence also bringing people to the voting stations, but this was always in 2018. Putin, well, I couldn't say bribed, but there were some extra payments to the population. And here it wasn't direct payments to different to different groups, but the whole situation with overheating of the economy left people with a sense of the situation, that now situation is okay or even better than it was, that the war become, I would say, the war routinized in their perception, and so there was also a factor, and for them elections was important. Otherwise, and this is also in the people's eyes, elections. It's also one reason why they're living better, because of the elections, and they get used to live better because of the elections. Because from time to time, authorities need to bring the population to vote for whatever. In 2020, it was constitutional vote, and it also paid by different gifts, different payments, and so on. So yeah, there is. I see the direct connection here.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I think it's perhaps the most important takeaway that we can give people from this talk is, I think, this what you're saying about how people are feeling economically. I mean, ultimately, people's support for the government, people's support for the war, Russia's next 6 years, everything will come down to how people's livelihoods and households are feeling, and what their wallets are looking like, and to a large degree, at least, that will be a defining thing. So the fact that people are feeling wealthier and more comfortable is a very important point, especially considering the fact that what we expected 2 years ago, when the sanctions against Russia were first introduced, was the exact opposite effect. So I think that's a very important takeaway. I just want to take this moment quickly to tell people that you can like this YouTube live stream, which will bring it up to everybody's attention, and also you can send in questions. So hit like, and also fire us your questions. And the first one has actually come in, so I think it brings us a little bit back to the Crocus City Hall, but I think it's a good moment to talk about the war itself. You know, the backdrop to everything that we're discussing. And the questions come in is asking about the fact that Putin seems to be more and more extreme in his pronouncements since the election, which was only a few days ago. But especially what we saw, some of this, perhaps what we're referring to in these extreme statements, are the accusations that Ukraine was in some way involved in the ISIS attack, hired ISIS fighters or somehow sponsored them to participate in the attack in Moscow. These are kind of very extreme statements coming out of, coming from Putin and from the Kremlin recently. So maybe, Alexander, you could tell us a little bit about what the situation is looking like on the front line in Ukraine at the moment, and what kind of escalation Putin might be intending, blaming Ukraine for this Moscow attack. If this is a pretext for escalation, what could that escalation look like?
First of all, it would be mistaken to interpret this highest ever result of the re-election of Putin as a same numbers of the support of the continuation of the war. It's not 87% of the citizens, even we taken for granted they are real numbers. They are not the vast majority for the support of the war. It's the majority of the support for Putin, whatever he's going to do. If he's going to start peace talks, it will be the largest part, the vast part of this Putin's majority will be for the peace talks. If he starts a new offensive, not everybody, but maybe the largest, I'm almost sure that the largest part of this majority will be supporting him in this offensive effort. Now, the biggest problem of this high result, exactly as the biggest problem of how the authorities could benefit from the solidarity they have received after the terrorist attack, is what for to use this. There is nothing Putin could do without such a high result or without this terrorist attack. If we compare the situation of 20 years ago, when he benefits the solidarity created by the terrorist attack for, dismantling the major independent TV channels, or defederalization of the country when he suppressed the election of the governors, now he doesn't need any such. The vertical of power has built. The war has already going on. The grueling combats are going on. He doesn't need both tools, the record result and the record solidarity, if we assume that we have a record solidarity of the citizenship of Russia, of the citizens of Russia, to do something besides one thing, maybe another one attempt of an offensive in the Ukrainian front. Everything else, the death penalty, the anti-LGBT politics, the new repressions against the fifth column, the new hostile rhetoric against the West, everything is possible without such an extreme things as a highest ever result and the deadliest ever, not the deadliest ever, because in Beslan we had more deaths in 2004, more than 300. Then he may use it only to convert this solidarity and this result in another attempt to change the situation in the front. And to my opinion, he will try.
He will try and do that.
Yeah.
Sasha, what do you think the goals on the front line could be? Do you think they? I mean, I understand that they're constantly shifting, but if we're looking at the next year or so, do you think there is a desire to lay claim to and control, actually control the provinces that Russia has laid claim to constitutionally? You know, you have 4 regions of Ukraine that Russia has partially occupied, but lays claim to the whole thing. Do you think that's the aim? Does Russia want to push along the front line to achieve that, or are the goals bigger?
I think so. It's quite very unthankful stuff to try to get into Putin's head and to learn what he thinks about. So what I see from the front line that after this so-called triumph in Avdiivka, where Russians lost so many people, they need some pause, and so they are attacking from different part of the front line. The front line is pulsing, and probably somewhere a breakthrough is possible. But what I know for sure that first and foremost, Putin feels himself quite overconfident on the situation. So he literally thinks that he's winning. And this can bring him to some misjudgment or wrong decisions. But anyway, his overconfidence goes down on the hierarchy of Russian decision makers. So, and it is a problem, and I think that is a problem for the West. The second, what I learned that Putin wants to turn Ukrainian page now in 2024. Because the situation in 2025 in terms of munition, in terms of weapons for Ukraine could be different, and could be different not in the favor of Russia. So that's why probably he will try to get as much as he can during 2024 when the situation is unstable, when now it looks like his favor, when West allies are quite slow in their assistance to their help to Ukraine. That's why it's decisive for. So I think that for Ukraine, and what I learned from my brilliant colleagues, Mike Hoffman and Dara Masikat, that coming 12, 18 months for Ukraine can be decisive from a pure military standpoint. And speaking from the Russian side, from the side of Russian economy, I have bad news for you here. Putin has enough money to continue to finance the war, the current stance of the war. He probably has resources to. So it's kind of debate. Can he manage a new wave of mobilization or some sort of full-scale mobilization? Of course, manpower is a problem for Russian army. But labor shortages and workers deficit is a problem for Russian economy, and Putin is aware of that. That's the first. And the second, it's for me, it's not super clear. The extreme capacity of Russian military industry complex. So if they could get extra 300,000 people in trenches, so do they have enough weapons and munition to arm these people? It is unclear to me, and I'm not sure if we are talking about this kind of amounts of people. I'm not sure that it's possible. So here can be some weakening spots, but for sure 2024 would be decisive. Yeah.
For Ukraine, yeah. I mean, this is there's a lot to go back to here, but this is one of the things that I think defined all of my conversations with just whether with friends, with just ordinary people in Russia going up to the election. Most people were worried about it in the sense of, once the Kremlin goes through this electoral hurdle, because it's obviously always a point of weakness for any regime to go through this process, even if it's a very controlled thing. That coming out of that, with that all out of the way and done, the Kremlin could start launching another mobilization wave. We saw in September 2022 just how destabilizing that was. Thousands of people fled the country, something like 300,000 people at the time. You saw these from satellite imagery, you could see the queues of cars as Russians were trying to get to Kazakhstan to escape the forced mobilization and conscription for the war. But this was September 2022. So a lot of time has passed since then, and a lot of fighting has happened. A lot of men have been injured and a lot of men have been killed. And there is a need, obviously, evidently, to some degree, there is a need to replenish the ranks. Now, Russia is trying to do this with, recruitment, volunteers, whatever it wants to call them. But, a mobilization wave may be necessary. Alexandra, do you think, what kind of impact would that have now on Russian society if the Kremlin does choose to go down that route, if it does feel it's necessary and it feels that it has enough military equipment to, actually arm these men and feed them and clothe them, if it was to do that? Do you think it would provoke the same kind of reaction as it did in September 2022? Do you think society has changed since then?
The mobilization of ordinary men remains a highly unpopular measure, extremely unpopular, with a high risk. That's why I was saying that if they try to extend this social solidarity after the terrorist attack, they will do it for the offensive effort, not necessarily for the mobilization. They will try to avoid by any means.
Any means, yeah.
Yes, the problem with mobilization is now that from one side, they are more prepared. Russia has never mobilized reservists before, after the Second World War. The first mobilization was badly chaotic. Now it may be smoother because the military commissariats, so recruitment points and camps are more readier than before. But from the other side, those who were watching the first mobilization have seen a very simple fact. Nobody of those who had been mobilized in September of 2022 returned back home. That doesn't mean that they all died, not yet, of course, but nobody was demobilized, which divides society into unequal portions. A smaller part of it is fighting, and there are family of fighters. The largest part, way largest part, is continuing to live more or less normal and peaceful lives. Yeah. Which means the idea of being mobilized highly unpopular, because the system is not, like during the Second World War, or because it was the last mobilizations it was very similar to the recruitment system of the Russian Tsarist Empire, when those who were recruited soldiers were recruited for 20 and more years and basically lived all their life in the army. Yeah. The other thing that people have seen, of course, that those mobilized have been paid, at least. They are not fighting for free. As Sasha said, the budget has enough money to pay both the contractors and mobilized, which at least serves as a sort of compensation to the families of those who lost their men for the army.
Yes, I did a piece of reporting at one point, speaking to the wives of men who've been mobilized and still mobilized, and one of them actually was speaking a lot about how this, reminded her, what is this Tsarist Russia? My husband is serving now an indefinite sentence. I thought it was a very interesting comparison. We're getting lots of interesting questions. I'll just take this chance to remind people to hit like again on the YouTube channel, and also just to follow Carnegie Russia Eurasia Center across all the different platforms for more of this kind of conversation. And we're getting some really interesting questions again about the Crocus attack and what it could mean for relations with Tajikistan, which is where which is where the four main suspects come from, and also just about internal kind of dynamics within Russia's relationship to its region. So I wonder whether one of you would be able to talk about that. Would you expect a kind of an impact on migrant labor, for example? Maybe Sasha, you could talk about how important migrant labor is for the Russian economy and how that's changed, and what something like this could do to that, and especially if we see some growth in kind of Russian attacks against migrants. We do see violence against migrants in the past, and this could trigger more of that. What do you think could happen next?
So first, here we need to stand and admit that Russian society is extremely white, and white in terms of their skin, and quite nationalistic, and it was even before the war. Everyone I spoke with, and it's also what we can see from the data, that Russian economy extremely dependent on laborers of migrants' labor in such areas like utilities, construction, and services. Services for the people, like retail. There are lots of migrants working there, warehouses, and this so-called the economy of 21st century. Delivery services in the big cities, but not only in the big. Russia has quite diversified service economy, not only in Moscow and St. Petersburg, and usually migrants do this kind of job. And not only Crocus attack, but also every time there are some bad events, unfortunate events with migrants involved in Russian society. It's every time it's raising questions about possible changes in migration policy, and every time they are all throwing under the carpet because of the situation on the labor market, and now it's worsens.
Yeah.
And what we see now that it was what's interesting, that Kremlin is trying to attract migrants to go fight for Russia in Ukraine, and they eased the procedure of entering to Russian citizenship. I think they've made they've done amendments 5 or 4 times previous, back in 2023 and 2022. So if you need Russian citizenship before, you need to pass the exam, language test, be clear in terms of legislation, be legal, and so on. So now you just can go to the army and you can get Russian passport. So with one hand, they ease themselves. They ease the opportunity for ISIS terrorists to get a Russian passport, and with another hand, now they're trying to figure out how to fix the problem. And the second, migrant inflow in Russia almost stopped because of the war. And there are 2 reasons to this. The first one is that the purely economical, that Russian labor market competing with other labor markets of the region. So basically all these people from Central Asia can go and work into Gulf states or in South Korea or in Turkey. They can get jobs. Yeah. And they can, and there would be no problems with money transfers because of the sanctions. There would be no problems, there would be less problems in terms of safety and security. and probably local authorities will treat them better than in Russia. That's the first. And the second, of course, the risk of being sent to the war involuntarily just because the Russian authorities want this also prevents people of coming into Russia. So I think that the situation with migrants is quite it's quite complicated and ambivalent. And but what I can see from here that the society who is very tolerated to violence and who is sick of whatever. So people need to steamed out. So they will see migrants as a particular legal target. So I can predict that probably there would be some conflicts among purely Russian white population and migrants in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very interesting. I'm already seeing just in social media channels, people from Russia's Muslim minority backgrounds posting things about how their experience has changed already in public places in Russia and feeling more threatened. So this could all escalate. I think I just want to stick to the economy a little bit more. We're talking about the picture that we're building at the moment is of a very confident and overconfident Putin on the front line, a 2024 that is, where Russia may have superiority on the front line in Ukraine, and also a time when Russians are not feeling the impact of the war on their wallets and are feeling pretty, supportive of Putin, as Alexandra was saying, willing to support him whether he goes for peace or whether he goes for war. It's sort of just a kind of mass majority support. Is there anything in the economy, Sasha, that could present a kind of obstacle for this in the long term? What are the factors that, are there any factors, economic factors, that pressure Putin to put an end to the war, or to slow it down, or to start negotiations? Does he have to make choices at any point between, where the money goes?
I would say that not the economy wags the war, but the opposite. So I don't see any kind of problems that will come that can possibly come from the economic side, and that will force Putin or put enough pressure on Putin to stop the war or to change his attitude towards Ukraine or towards the West. Probably the situation at the front line can be decisive for him to make some tough economical decisions, because for now what we see, the economy is looks quite resilient, but at the same time fragile. And of course, economic growth, according to Rosstat, was 3.6% in 2023, which is bigger than a couple of economies, a couple of developed economies. But if you want to have a reality check, you can look at the key rate, and it's 16%, which basically means that the cost of the money within Russian economy is 16%. So people are taking loans over 20%. And they still feel themselves quite confident. So war became existential for political stance, for economic stance either. So Russian authorities have Putin committed record sums to Russia's war in Ukraine in 2022 and in 2023, and spending topped 30, and in 2024 the whole spending topped 35 trillion rubles, and 5 years ago it was only half of that size. I mean, and now I think approximately 1/3 of aggregated demand is distributed via this expanded military industry complex. So and for me it's quite complicated to imagine how it will shrink itself when the war stops, or if Russian budget will get less money. What we see from so there are limitations, and one, we talked about this before, there's a limitation on the labor market. So three major powers who are competing for the workforce within Russia is military itself. So they literally need men to take guns and go and kill Ukrainians at the front line. Second, it's expanded military industry complex who need to increase output as much as possible. and it already operates on its maximum capacity. And the third is the civil sector, which also need to produce goods, and the economy need to continue to work and to develop. So here is the one limitation. The second is export revenues, which is not growing. We see that Russia rerouted quite successfully its export flows into China and India, but we don't see the extensive growth of export revenues. And here is another limitation. Already, there are signs that Russian government is already trying to accumulate as more money as it's possible. So they're milking, so they came after people's income, and what we see now, the debate about the parameters of tax reform in terms of personal income. And what is more important for this for the budget is corporate tax. So they will cover the major deficit from the corporate tax. They want to increase the rate from 20 to 25. And for personal income, there is a very tricky and very interesting stuff, and I don't know how the Russian government will deal with that, but I'd like to see it, because the parameters that's already leaked to the media shows that all these people who now feel themselves living better, so all these military people, their wives, their families, who all paying income tax, they need to pay more. Which that doesn't make them pretty happy. I would say. And if there would be exemptions from the taxation on this particular group of people, it's only increase inequality within the society and interregional inequalities. So the issue is quite tricky. But if the government already came after people's income and corporate income, seems like they don't have any kind of long-time view, the long-term vision on the situation. They are dealing with today problem of fulfilling budget, and and operating with a level of extremely high uncertainty.
Yeah. Constant kind of just a guessing game, there's never really a long-term plan, or constant opportunism and responsive politics. I think, Alexandra, maybe to go to you in our sort of one of the last things that I think we'll have time to discuss. There was also talk, if we're talking about the consequences of the re-election, the next few months, few years, what do we think may happen with a Kremlin reshuffle? It's really hard to make any of these kind of predictions. We don't know. But do you think there's any pressure to do a kind of changing of the guard? And how is the elite feeling in general? What do you think the mood is like in relation to 2 years of war, 2 years of sanctions? What's the is there any risk to the resilience of the regime from within?
The usual rumors after another Putin re-election is the change of the head of the government, the prime minister, maybe the most famous ministers, maybe most visible ministers like Minister of Defense or Minister of Foreign Affairs. Well, it's not impossible. The fact that, as a matter of fact, he doesn't need any re-election or any constitutional procedure to do so. When he changed Medvedev as a head of the government, there was no election. It was just
came out of the blue. Yeah.
Yes, just an address to the parliament. My impression is that no revolutionary changes are coming, especially as the government is considered, for two reasons. One is that the aging Putin is not loving to surround himself by unknown people, and these people is very known, familiar, and usual. He knows how to communicate with them. And that's one reason. Another is that everybody in the society, including maybe himself, were uncertain about the result of the sanctions in the early 2022 after the invasion. And the scale of the sanctions was really large and the pace was really quick. And the government coped with it. As Sasha said,
Successful.
yes, the government, the economy is flexible and coping successfully with the external pressure, at least in this short and mid-term time. That means after the declaration of the successful defensive war against the economic aggression from the side of the West, why to change the headquarter of this economic defense?
Yeah, why change the economic elite that's working?
Lavrov, of course, is getting old and was asking to release him even many years ago. But now the impression is that they don't like to they don't like the missions. It's a team of a battleship. They don't want anybody to leave this battleship during the battle.
Yeah.
Some exemptions are possible, but not like massive change.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very interesting, and actually answers one of the questions that we had coming in from our audience, asking whether you expect any economic personnel changes, not just.
Mostly agree. I mostly agree with Alexander that well, for the decision makers now, well, who become a prime minister, it is biggest prize for them. And there are some substitutes on the benches. There were rumors that Kiriyenko wants to become a prime minister. Oreshkin Maxim wants to become a prime minister. But it's all rumors. And I also feel that Putin doesn't, there is no vibe between Putin and Mishustin anymore, I heard. But it's all unsustainable in terms of, the government, well, navigate this yacht through the eyes of sanctions quite successfully, the economic bloc of the government. So reshuffling doesn't apply to the head of the central bank, to Elvira Nabiullina. Siluanov probably remains in place. So there can be some reshuffling in terms of VP. There are VPs we not writing about them a lot, like Victoria Abramchenko or Victor, I think, Averchuk. I'm not sure his name, sorry for that. But it's also an indicator that he's not on the top of the news every time. And but he's actually responsible for foreign work, for work with the foreign countries. So I don't expect any kind of major. And the one more reason, so of course Putin is overconfident and the economy, it looks resilient, but still a lot depends on what's going on the front line, and a lot depends on the flexibility and the speed of reaction of state actors. And any kind of reshuffle, even in a peaceful time, any kind of reshuffle requires time. So when one of them stop working, their successors will get their new offices, hire their assistants, apparatus, and so on. So I mean, even in the peaceful 2018, it took 6 months for the government to completely finish the whole, within the government to finish the whole story with new appointees. So I'm not sure that Putin has. I don't feel that the system has this 6 months time frame. So, so in terms of what I expect in terms of economic policy, probably the greater influence of FSB on economic life, and it became more and more noticeable. Here, there is something to observe and to see, but in terms of personnel, in terms of sure names and personals, no.
Maybe a greater influence of FSB in all forms of life, not just economic life, as we go forward. Well, I think we're coming up to the end of our time. We've covered a lot of ground here and a lot of food for thought, and and ideas for me to steal and use in my articles. So thank you to Sasha and Sasha for that, to Alexandra Prokopenko and to Alexander Baunov, our experts from the Carnegie Russia Eurasia Center. And before you log off, I would encourage you to subscribe to the YouTube channel of the center so that you can stay in touch for future events, and also to follow Carnegie Politica on X or on Telegram if you use it. And this gives you lots of analysis of this kind. All the links are in the description to this event. So stay in touch and follow our experts. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.